The main problems that we see with this are that the larvae, the caterpillars, are voracious feeders and can completely defoliate the trees. And I'm sure if you're here, you're very aware of what kind of damage that they can cause. They start hatching in kind of mid-April, early May, and that's when they start feeding. It's nonstop feeding for 7 to 8 weeks. The adults don't feed. They exist solely to mate. So the main obstacles that we see to forest management are related to the larvae and the damage that they cause. So it's basically trying to prevent either prevent the larvae from hatching from eggs or kill the larvae as they're feeding. There's four life stages that the insects go through. First is the egg, where they overwinter in these egg sacs that are laid by the female moths. The egg sacs are usually in bundles of 500 to 600. So each egg sac can hold a multitude of these very small eggs. The abundance of these egg sacs can determine how badly a forest will be impacted by these insects. So when we are trying to see if treatment would be effective in an area, we usually look to eggs first to see if it's going to be a huge outbreak or if it's just going to be this small thing that can be handled by natural mechanisms. The larvae are the most obvious part of the infestation because they are feeding and cause all sorts of nasty things. You'll see defoliation of trees. Sometimes it's partial, where it's just the leaves look very haggard and bitten off halfway, or it'll be completely bare, and the waste product that they produce, the frass, gets over everything. It's a kind of slick reddish substance, and it can stain porches, concrete, clothes. There is some mild allergenic qualities to it as well. Nothing that's like a anaphylactic reaction, but usually itchiness and hives. The pupa is there. It doesn't really cause any problems. It just stays in a kind of dormant state while it's transforming into an adult for 1 to 2 weeks. And then the adults, the males are the flying portion of the species. They're the ones that seek out the flightless females that are just emitting pheromones, usually right next to where they hatched, or right where they pupated, and will lay 1 egg sac during their adult lifespan. It's fairly short-lived, but it's a species that's very, very prolific with its breeding and with the amount of eggs that it produces. So going over the pupal stage, not much to talk about. Most treatments, once it gets to this point, are not effective because they're just hanging out, not eating anything, waiting to use the energy that they've gathered as larvae to transform into an adult. We'll be talking mostly about egg masses today because that's where a lot of you all will have the greatest effect on the populations in your woods and what can determine if action is necessary to do anything more. As you can see, they have this sort of rusty orange color, and they'll be firm to the touch when they're fresh. So they'll be almost like springing back as they have the eggs pushing against that pressure. When they're old and the eggs have already hatched and the larvae have spread out, they'll be very soft to the touch, almost spongy, hence Spongy Moth, and will be wiped away from the tree very easily.
So you're saying if you, like I was telling you about mine, if I scrape them down, they seem to come off pretty easy. You think they're already hatched?
They may have already hatched if it's very soft and pliable. If they're still firm and they don't have any holes or any like exits that you can see on there, they're probably still new egg sacs that haven't hatched yet. It's a good question though. The species itself, when it's trying to find host trees to lay their eggs on, they have a multitude of species that they feed on and can be found laying their egg sacs on just about anything that is a cool and dark place. But they do prefer the undersides of branches or furrows and bark. You may have noticed walking in, there is some spongy moth egg masses on the walls of the building, and the pupa have kind of hidden in there as well. So either on your way out or when we're coming back in from the demonstration, you can keep a lookout for those as well. It's a good example of where you can find them in the environment. The preferred hosts for them, the two that I know are that you will pretty much always find at least one egg sac on if you're looking for them, are oak trees and blue spruce. For some reason, they love Colorado blue spruce, but oak trees are kind of the ones that are native to Michigan that they'll be. You'll find most of the caterpillars feeding on those. But like I said, if they're hungry enough, they'll eat just about anything, whether it's cherry trees, maple trees, other pines. It's a really wide range of what they can eat and use as fuel. And each sac contains hundreds of eggs. So this is where we can have a lot of impact. If you can reach the eggs and destroy them, you can limit that population by 500 to 600. The larvae are voracious eaters. They will hide during the day to kind of escape predators, and they're most active at dawn and dusk. Other names for this species are the crepuscular moth, which crepuscular means active at dawn and dusk. So they are easy to spot once they're at larger instars, which just means larger state of growth. They have red and blue spots down their midsection, and they have bulbous yellow heads. When they are freshly hatched, they can be confused for a lot of different insects because they don't have a lot of the markings that are visible to the naked eye yet. They can look a lot like tent caterpillars or other native species until they start growing in the amount that they feed. The waste product, the frass, is the number one complaint I get about what these caterpillars do. With second being they've completely killed my trees because they've lost their leaves for that year. One thing to note is that a fully grown healthy tree can reflush their leaves at least once before having stunted growth for that year. So if for some reason they lose all their leaves from being eaten up by the caterpillars, they can create a whole new set of leaves and be very marginally stunted by that growth. Once we have 2 or 3 flushings of leaves that are completely eaten down, then you start seeing ooh, this is going to be really harmed in the future because it's using all those resources to produce those leaves and is getting nothing back from them. So the complete defoliation is usually what I worry about with that, because it's a sign of a very bad infestation that may be at its peak numbers or is just reaching the peak of the population count. Because it does take quite a few of these insects to actually completely strip a tree bare. The negative effects of losing those leaves is you can have some branches die back from the loss of tissue, basically. And in younger trees or in evergreen trees, they may even die. The younger trees don't have as much of a root stock to reflush the trees the leaves that come up on the tree, so they can die a lot quicker than the large trees that have plenty of sugars stored in their roots. And evergreens don't regrow their old needles. They're not like broadleaves that can just keep pumping out new leaves whenever they get lost. Evergreens they put a lot more resources into the waxy cuticle of the needles, so they tend not to regrow old needles, and that can limit how many resources are coming in to the plant. Let's see. So this gets more into what we can do about it, right? The first thing that I recommend is if you can reach any of the egg sacs to destroy them. This can be done in a variety of ways. My preferred way is either using a toothbrush or a box cutter to scrape off the egg sacs, and doing this fairly close to a cup of soapy water. The soap water is basically a surefire way to kill any insects because the soap helps the water essentially drown the insects. Their breathing system is different than ours. They don't really have lungs. They have a liquid that is pumped through their whole body that transports oxygen. And when you interrupt that with water and soap, it kills them right away. And for eggs, it kind of destroys the outer shell that is protecting the innards. For another thing that we'll be going over is the banding of host trees. I would focus mostly on oaks if you have them, because those are the preferred host of these insects by far. Basically, if you have a band of burlap wrapping around kind of like a skirt around the tree, it's a good way to capture the larva, because they're looking for nice, cold, dark places to hide during the day. And burlap provides that nice, cool environment for them. So it tends to trick them into staying in them during the day. So at noon, you can find just a whole bunch of them as they're hiding from the noonday sun. And you can dispose of them into soap water or squish them or do whatever you would like to them. It's a pretty effective method of controlling the larva when they're at later stages of growth. I will talk about, oh yeah.
Do they only work at night? Is that what you're saying?
Well, they work mostly at dawn and dusk, and they'll hide at other points during the day.
The ones at my house work 24/7.
Yeah, once they...
All the time you hear that dropping down through the leaves.
Yeah. They'll kind of work in shifts once the population gets to a high enough level where there'll be ones that have eaten plenty, they have to digest, so they'll hide somewhere, and then the next feeders will come through and start eating down as well. So they're fairly organized little creatures. They will be feeding pretty much nonstop once you get to week 4 or 5, because they're actually large enough to be able to make that full cycle up and down the tree. So it depends on what time of year and how many that you have to have that sort of effect, like that constant rain of droppings. The chemical treatment for spongy moth is something that I do think is a last resort, and something that really needs to be done on a large scale to be done effectively. So an individual landowner on 5 acres, if they spray all the trees on their property, it may have an effect on the immediate feeding of those spongy moth caterpillars, but you're going to have encroachment from the neighbors. Next year, it's going to be just as bad. So it's not effective unless you have a large-scale treatment for that. And there are risks to other species as well. Most notably the monarch butterfly. Monarchs hatch at similar time periods to the spongy moth caterpillars. So while they're feeding and you have a breeze that takes this insecticide over onto milkweed, it can have very disastrous effect on the population.